Welcome back to the Tide Generator podcast. Today's episode is about what's memorable now. The experience design and AV worlds are all about creating memorable events and engaging installations. Frequently, what makes something memorable are elements of spontaneity and surprise, moments of human connection. Now, with those connections strictly regulated for health and safety, we wonder, what is memorable now? How can we foster the happenstance interactions between people in spaces designed for social distancing? And what will we cherish most about experiencing public venues together again? Welcome back to the Tide Generator podcast. Today we're going to be talking about what's memorable, and especially what's memorable now. The AV and experience design industries are really focused on creating memorable experiences. And as we reframe how people come together in spaces and how they share experiences, we're going to take a look at the elements that make things memorable and create connection within groups, and how we're going to be able to sustain and create new ways of fostering those connections as we come together in new socially distant and carefully organized and choreographed spaces. Here with me to talk about those topics are two people who work in very different and very overlapping, actually, versions of experience design. Today we have Paul Chavez, who is an associate specializing in technology and user experience with Arup. Welcome, Paul.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And I also have Nathan Adkisson. He's Director of Strategy and an Associate Creative Director with Local Projects. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Kirsten. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So today we want to talk about what makes experiences memorable and how we're adjusting to this new reality. And maybe to talk about that, maybe we'll just start at the beginning and talk a little bit about how some key elements of experience design are fostering those sort of happenstance occasions where people bump into each other or people make new connections within a space. I guess, how do you see that as being a part of what makes an experience memorable?
I'll go ahead. I think one of the mainstays of memorability is often surprise and the unexpected. And I think that any kind of circumstances in which you sort of encounter things that by chance, I think, have the potential to be memorable. I think today, quite possibly, the ability for those kind of happenstance, accidental events has really reduced quite a bit. I don't know what you think, Nathan, but this is, I think, one of the challenging aspects and one of the aspects that makes maybe time pass in a different sort of way now than it used to, because these sort of memorable events maybe are happening less frequently, and so we don't have quite as good of milestones in our memory.
Right. I think that this moment that we're living in is interesting in how it throws into relief both the values that really matter to people, as well as, I think, gets us as experience designers thinking about what is universal in terms of what makes a memorable experience. And so I've noticed that there are two things that are almost at complete opposite ends of the spectrum that can be memorable. And so the one is kind of novelty, which is what I think you're starting to talk about, the kind of the surprises that happen in in-person experiences, seeing something new and different, if there's still a purpose to it, not just something that's random and novel, but something that's kind of brand new and surprising for a purpose. But then at completely the opposite end of the spectrum is rituals, are things that we do over and over, and they're kind of the same. And that can be either in-person meetings or events, often that are very casual, but also that's kind of designed into the way that we behave with our devices, right? They're kind of a ritual. And you just think about when Apple or anybody changes a feature, changes a gesture, they've kind of broken the ritual, and people, that's perhaps memorable in a bad way. Hey, remember that feature that I really love and got really used to? Remember when they changed it with iOS 8? I hate that. So I think it's kind of interesting that you can find what's memorable on either end.
I think that's really super interesting, Nathan. The thing that I think about, I totally agree. Rituals at a higher level maybe now, obviously, because we're doing these routines. I think what might be worth talking about is the way that time changes in ritual versus the novel, and ritual tends to, I would say, expand time. You know, when it tends to give you let you lose track of time in some respects, and not necessarily have to pay attention to it. And then the novel is a marker in time, and so therefore you know it passes in a little more measured kind of way. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. Do you feel like you have more time now than you used to, or do you feel like you have less time? At least for me, in the beginning, when all this started, you know, it was a disaster, and I felt like we were all working double time to try to figure out what was going on, and there were tons of inefficiencies, and we were trying to hang on to some of the old ways that we'd behaved, 2 or 3 months ago. But since then, I think it's leveled out. We've figured out what really works and what really matters, and I feel like I've had more time and more intentional time.
That's interesting, because based on behavior, I would say it's maybe the opposite for me, in that we were looking for things to spend time on earlier on, and what seems to be happening now is that we've filled the time with work. We've gotten used to the pace of it, and so we figured out that we can fill time now, more. And I don't know if that means we have more time, because in some ways we're doing more, maybe because it is so concentrated. We're not moving around. There's this element of efficiency in what we're doing right now, because everything is right here, and for the most part. And so I think we do get a lot more done. And I'm talking to people within our company that feel like we're getting a lot more done these days. And that's sort of off topic a little bit, but it is this matter of time, and time is an important part of experience, I think, and how we're experiencing it today.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, perhaps some of that, I sometimes hate to attribute things just to different geographical differences, but sometimes I think it is real, right? You're on the West Coast and we're here on the East Coast, and after living in New York for 10 years, it feels like my life was scheduled within an inch of what was possible. And so now I'm still in New York, but I've escaped upstate. And so I think there might be a little bit more of, let's say, that California vibe. So I feel slightly less scheduled. And in the beginning, I think once everybody saw that everything could be a meeting that could happen on Zoom, it could just be back to back to back. It was like that for a little while. But now, at least the groups that I'm working with have, I think, turned a corner from that. And I'm at least liking the direction that it's moving.
Yeah, that really all of this makes me think about how we're all gaining a new appreciation for the space that we now have in our schedule. And at first, it felt like this indeterminate amount of time. We were suddenly filling an excess of time. It was slow, it was sludgy. How are we going to fill all this time? We were trying to find things to occupy it. And now we've expanded into the space a little more fully, and we're realizing we like this pace and we like not being overscheduled. And just traveling between events, that being gone is an interesting way to regain time. And that makes me think about, as people come back into experiences that you're creating, Do you think that people are going to have a different expectation in terms of, like, if they're looking for an element of joy or an element of spontaneity or connection or mindfulness, are you going to be able to play with the notion of time a little differently in an experience?
That's interesting. I don't think yet I've thought about that specifically as a kind of design principle now in any different way. But what I have been thinking about is some of the conversations that we've had, even among the three of us, have been about when we go to this virtual world, what do we really miss? And I think the first answer that a lot of people would give is we need to engage more of the senses. That we're to be fully operational humans. We have all the senses that go beyond what we use in a virtual meeting like this. But I've actually started to reconsider that. I'm not sure that actually what we need, let's say, is for Zoom to have a bunch of haptics and to pipe in conference room smell and all of that. I think there are moments when being able to make eye contact and having the webcam on is really great. But there have been other times in the last 2 or 3 months when I'm really glad that I was able to do something else actually away from the desk, but still be listening. And so I think what's great, and when people are designing any new systems for the point that we're at, to think about the on and off switch of the different components. Meaning it doesn't have to be all on, all sensory all the time. Give us the opportunity to choose how deep we want to go at any given minute. And so I'll just give one sort of example. A couple of weeks ago, I did a virtual Daybreaker. If you're familiar with Daybreaker, it's an early morning kind of sober dance party that happens in a lot of different cities.
Festivals and stuff.
And it's awesome. It's really energizing. It's really fun. I haven't been to a physical one in years and years, but someone said they're doing a virtual one. It's going to start with yoga, and then there's going to be some music. And I tuned in mainly for the yoga, for the exercise. And then when the DJ started playing, I felt no need to dance in my home, but I listened to the music while I did something else, and I didn't have a camera on. But there were hundreds of other people who what they needed actually was to be on camera and be dancing and see other people dancing. So that worked for them. My situation of kind of dipping in halfway worked for me. And I think that paradigm could work for a lot of different situations, including things more serious than dance parties.
No, I think that ties into this also this maybe flexibility with space in future designs, the idea of the screen space and the online space versus the physical space, and how we're going to, one of the, I think, mutations that's occurring because of this is that we'll be way more fluid in transitioning from screen space to physical space and combining these hybrids and all of that. This fluidity is going to head off in new directions for us, and the way that we leverage somebody on screen and somebody in the physical space. I think there'll be some creativity around that. I think more sometimes around practical applications of technology. And so one of the things that Kirsten and I were talking about is how meetings, what is the fully hybrid, meeting these days, and what technologies are needed to enable that use of space, physical space, and then you've got half the people on screen, and leveraging this transition between the two is going to be quite challenging. I have the same experience that you have as far as taking my screen around with me outdoors while I'm working. The other day, my friends at Electronic Countermeasures were VJing like a party. It was a birthday party, so it was like this mashup of Zoom and VJing like in a club. And so there were all these overlays, and people were dancing in Zoom windows, and it was just like complete kind of a new experience. Very similar, it sounds like, to what you've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The highlight of that, by the way, was at the DJ played YMCA at the end, and it was, to see the people interacting with Zoom with the song. I think it was an interesting view of the future or view of the present, whatever.
Yeah, I think what's going to emerge and they're already emerging, are new behaviors that we don't really have language for yet. We have language for the experiences that we're used to, and we tack the word virtual on the front of it, and then say it's a virtual meeting, it's a virtual dance party, but it's kind of becoming something else. And what I've noticed also is the experiences work better. They're more memorable, to Kirsten's question, when they aren't just trying to mimic what we're used to.
Exactly.
There was a conference that I went to right after we all had to lock ourselves up in our homes, and it was exactly the same format, the same schedule that a typical conference would have been, and it was not great. You don't want to sit in your chair for that long. One of the best things about a conference isn't really the scheduled programming. It's all the spontaneity and the wandering around and meeting new people. In the way that conferences just have to work usually is you have to rent a venue for a certain amount of time. So you just try to pack as much as you can into that time that it's been rented. If it's not in physical space anymore, it doesn't have to do that. So we can think about, is there such a thing as we need another word beyond conference, but it's something that you can dip in and out of over the course of 6 months. And I almost wonder if curricula is a better maybe analogy, meaning it's not just three days of really, really hardcore talks. It's a path that you're on for 6 months that has some kind of focus. We may get more out of that.
Nathan, what do you think about the sense of liveness versus pre-recorded content in those environments? I mean, is there? I personally feel like there's a certain there's a real value to something that is being broadcast live, and I think that it's something that the format, Instagram and other places have leveraged this before, but today it's even more valuable. I feel like the more valuable thing that I can watch online is the one that's actually live.
Yeah, this Daybreaker party that I'm talking about, the DJs were actually mic'd up and were watching the grid of dancers and were commenting on them live. Mm-hmm. And there was something special and effective about that, to put it in comparison to if you were just listening to canned, Spotify. You have the feeling, I can pause this, I can come back to this later, but it's not at all the same if it's a live event. It reminds me, do you know Pop-Up Magazine? Are you familiar with that series?
I don't think so.
Oh, it's awesome. It's a series of live events. They tour around. They have an issue every quarter, every season, and it is mostly journalists, but really they're kind of giving a performed staged reading of a piece that they've done with musical and often projected or animated visuals there. But they're very clear at the beginning of every issue, we're not recording this, we're not putting it online, we've made it just for you. And you hear that, something about the scarcity of that makes you pay attention. But there's no reason really why we couldn't also do that even with this, where if you want to hear it, you got to tune in. This is only happening now.
Yeah, there's something about that, the ephemeral nature of that. Like, this will disappear unless I tune in now, and I will keep my eyes locked on it longer. If I worry that I might miss something, I might miss the DJ calling someone out on something. I've been obsessing over the Cornell bird feeder cam. And every morning when I wake up, I hurry to see if I can see the person who refills the seeds. This is my greatest thrill right now.
Have you caught them yet?
Yes. Now I know what time. And this morning I took so much joy in it because there was a couple new things he did. And that is what I live for. And again, my eyes are, I'm staying on that because I'm not going to click away from that because what might I miss? And that's just a guy and a bird feeder. Even
Totally.
the birds, like the spontaneity of the birds showing up I'm finding it to be just endlessly captivating.
I mean,
So I've been thinking a lot about it.
Yeah, it's something that you don't have in your immediate vicinity, but you can still experience in this live way. And there's something really about it. There was a live cast the other day in a zoo that they were showing these animals. So this connection, this real-time connection is something I seek out. And I've been advising, customers that are doing live theater or live music and that sort of thing that do real live when we're back in spaces, but that they really need to leverage the liveness of streaming and that sort of thing. And I think streaming and Zoom, there are some big benefactors in the technology side of things that will change real spaces in the future, and become these hybrids.
Mm-hmm. Something I've noticed too is I felt actually more connected to people in these virtual environments when the camera has been off and we've been away from our desks. We're doing something else. So either cooking together, watching a film together, just some other actual human activity beyond sitting in a chair. I've never been an online video game player, but I'm trying all of these new things at this time. So
right.
I got a headset, and I'm playing some of that with some friends. And so you hear them and you can talk to each other, but you're actually doing something. So you don't have the kind of forced, let's try to make eye contact through a webcam, which something about that feels so much less natural than let's just talk, let's do things, but we can talk to each other and listen to each other. And I don't know if you've heard about this. This is a theory someone put out that has kind of stuck with me about why men in particular seem to socialize by doing things like playing video games and watching sports, fishing. It's because, according to this theory, when men have to make sustained eye contact for a long time, it initiates a kind of alpha male competition, and it's kind of uncomfortable. But if they're sitting side by side and the gaze is at something else, then, the fishing just ends up sort of being this visual distraction, and then they can talk about what they really want to talk about.
They could commune then.
Yeah, and they talk about that too, the side-by-side walking conversation.
Right.
We actually, in our earliest discussions about what we might want to bring to the virtual world, it's more the feeling of walking through a space with somebody or riding in a car with somebody, because it does change the conversation. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point.
I've been experimenting the last couple of weekends with a program called Kazam, which is basically kind of a low latency tool for musicians. It requires, for example, that you plug in, with a hardwire to your router so that, it can reduce the latency just that much more. And it's not perfect, but it is interesting, to have this different oral experience with music instruments, and you can turn on the camera. And I don't know that it really gives you anything other than getting everything set up, but you can really, jam with other friends. And last weekend we had 3 of us, experimenting in live. So I think that it's a sort of the secondary sensory experience that we can have today and we need.
Mm-hmm. There's kind of a related idea that we think about, in particular when we do design of experiences for museums, that we call it triangulation. When you have 2 individuals who are interacting with something, they're interacting with, whatever, but then the third leg of the triangle is drawn and connected between them. Like, I'm making something, you're making something, and then we turn and we say, oh, what did you make? Oh, what did you make? and it completes the triangle, and then you have this really special social experience.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. There's a whole bunch of themes here. Humans love live. We do love the notion of live and something happening in real time, but we also like the different levels of participation. And I think that might be we're definitely learning that's like big time, like whether or not we want to be seen dancing, we want to be thrown up on a big screen and highlighted, or if we just want to listen. And I think there's going to be a more selective nature to the way we approach, especially as we have these hybrid experiences.
I mean, to Nathan's point earlier about moving around with the screen too. I mean, I think that this headshot thing, we've got to create different viewports soon. Getting really sick of this, this perspective. So, I think a variety. One of the things that we should be experimenting with is a variety of cameras and a variety of places that we can switch to easily, and mobile devices obviously provide that. But this kind of expansion of this viewport pretty important too.
So we're learning a lot. And now we have to think. We're learning about, I've been obsessing over listening to live recordings of music because I miss audience noise. I kind of wonder how we're going to, as we, there's been a couple concerts now where they've done socially distant audiences. I'm kind of hoping that we can pipe in remote audience noise to help fill in for those physical gaps in the space.
There are a couple of audience response systems that we're playing with now that mostly I think allow you to interact with buttons, and I think that's suboptimal. Ideally, you would be able to sort of chime in with your own voice, but I think there are bigger challenges with that sort of thing. I kind of wonder whether Alexa and Google have a place to play here, in that they're already listening to you anyway. So could you somehow have a wake word that is cheering, that cheering, if it knows you're watching a game or an event, can it just take your cheers that are happening in your home and retransport them and replay them in the venue?
Mm-hmm. I think about live experiences as having three components, and usually people only think about the second one. There's the planning or the preparation before the actual event itself, and that can either happen just the individual does it themselves, or if it's a social experience, we do it together. And a lot of studies have shown that that's actually sometimes even more meaningful. They talk about this with long trips. The planning and the excitement that you get leading up to a trip sometimes is even more rewarding to people than the trip itself. Then there's the trip or the event or the visit or the concert or whatever. And then there's the reflection or the memory recall after it. And so all of those are really important. And I think as designers, we would do well to think about all three moments, to not just imagine that the planning will happen, the memory will happen later, but to actually think about them as all three beats of the experience, to ask people to design into the experience, before you come to this live concert, like how are we going to do it? How are we going to behave? What did we listen to the album first? What did you think of it? What are you going to be listening for when they're playing live? Things like that.
Yeah, we love the anticipation. We like people always say, just put a simple thing on your calendar, because it improves your well-being and sense of contentment if you have something to look forward to, even if it's a minor thing. And now I find myself looking forward to the bird feeder. I think that this could be, I like that plan. I like all three elements. And I think, Nathan, we've talked before too about the memorable aspect being something that we want to have people literally have kind of a clear message. We want to deliver to them something that they will talk about when they leave. Like as event planners, as experienced designers, we can actually sort of curate what they might talk about afterward. And that's a really interesting aspect of all of this.
I find that preparation part interesting today. At least I'm having trouble kind of aggregating all of the potential things that I can experience, especially like I said, I'm looking for live events. And they're coming from a million different directions, right? I mean, and some of them I've set up with notifications and that sort of thing. But I feel like we knew how to ingest schedules. There are better aggregators for live events in the real world, but aggregators for all of these virtual events that are happening in so many dispersed areas, which is a beautiful thing. I think it's this evolutionary like explosion of live events and streaming and all of this, but there's it's difficult to sort of know what's going on at any given time.
Mm-hmm. You make me think about, prior to all of this, we used to, everywhere we were going, if we saw anything interesting, the way we would capture the memory is take a picture, right? Especially when we had cameras with our phones. I don't think that these days, I don't know, I could be wrong, that people are doing screen recordings of everything that they're doing and everything interesting that they're finding now. But now that we've taken away, or it's kind of less interesting to be taking
less
pictures
variety
of things with our phones, right? What is going to replace that, and how are we going to maybe shape that? In museum exhibition design, again, there are two studies that have stuck with me. One, which is when you show people something new, especially in an art museum, often if they just snap a picture of it, kind of at will, they're taking pictures all the time, and you ask them questions about it later, they actually don't remember it. That the act of taking the photo gave their brain permission to not really remember it. But if you ask them to almost go on a scavenger hunt, go look for something that achieves A, B, or C, and then take a picture of that and then come back and share it, they remember it X times better. So it's about, I think about the purpose of saying, here's what you should be looking for, try to remember this, and then it works.
There's a narrative there, right? And that narrative, that story is what, you know, what really creates memory, I think. Absolutely. One of the things I would say about that kind of experience that's slightly adjacent, though, I think, is when people come back to museums, I feel like there's going to be we know there's going to be reluctance to come back today. I think those sorts of activities that are accompanied by live streaming from the actual locations are going to be a bit of the smoothing, buffering kind of things that we're going to really need. We're going to need to see someone in that museum, you know, walking through with other people, or maybe more importantly, going through the new procedures, the safety procedures, the hygiene efforts that have been made. That's going on today, and that I'm going to go to the museum, but I really want to see, you know, what's going to happen before I get there, and it's to the benefit of all these organizations too, that they give the preview of what to expect before getting there.
Yeah, you're totally right. So much of it is about the image of sanitation and safety that we put forward. And I don't know how it was for the two of you, but personally, even more than both the scientific facts that I was reading and even the government recommendations, the thing that made the difference, that changed my behavior when I started wearing masks and gloves, was seeing other, you know, normal people like me. When nobody else was doing it, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just a sheep, but I was like, oh, well, no, nobody else is doing it. But then as soon as it tipped and everybody was wearing them, you go, oh yeah, it's now the strange thing to not wear them. And so I think
Totally.
It's going to be the same however we reintegrate, is we're going to look around to what other people are doing. And I just think that's how we are as humans that take our cues from other humans.
I think watching people learn and adapt and change is really one of the most fascinating things about what's happening right now. You know, like just seeing the massive adaptations that we've all made is pretty incredible. Yeah,
I think that's the most inspiring part of a very, very difficult time, is we're learning that we do want to pick up new habits, and we can actually rather quickly. You know, that first month, people were fumbling around, like you were saying. The sense of time was all over the place because we were readjusting, and now as we're getting some footing, we're actually choosing really interesting new ways of being present. And I guess maybe that would be my concluding question for our chat today is, you know, what do you think we'll cherish now when we get back out into the world? What are we going to cherish the most?
I miss hugs.
Oh, I was going to say exactly the same thing, Nathan. I swear to God, I was going to say I want to hug somebody like that doesn't live in my household.
I wasn't even I didn't consider myself a big hugger, but man,
that
right?
is crazy. No, totally. That human connection. I mean, I think that there's so many like worries about all the things that are going to be broken when we get back into the world, but there's such a desire to like get back together and see each other, and whether we have to have masks or not, whatever, that's going to be hopefully temporary and all that. But man, there is going to, well, I think we're seeing it last weekend. We're seeing this desire to reconnect. And so I feel the same way.
That gives me so much hope, because in the beginning I was worried that we would just slip into loneliness and isolation, and the new normal would just be everybody alone watching Netflix. And I'm sure isolation and loneliness was a real thing for a lot of people before this, and it probably still is. But what gives me hope is seeing all of the creativity and the energy that people have put into finding ways to connect with other people. It's been amazing. And also, what's interesting is that the playing field has been leveled for getting that kind of creativity out. You know, Trevor Noah and talk show hosts, they have to perform and try and be as creative as they can from their homes, just like the rest of us. So it's like we're all in the same circus together.
I totally agree. I mean, the Twitch and Facebook Live and Instagram of the world makes us all broadcasters, and it's quite an amazing thing to take in. Yeah, it's really wonderful.
Well, that's the most hopeful thing ever. I really like that. I look forward to going back out in the world and, hugging everyone.
That's right.
That's great. Oh, great. Well, thank you both so much. This has been an amazing chat, and I'm really excited to see what happens next and what we make memorable in the future. So thanks again for joining
Kirsten,
me.
thanks for bringing us together. Nathan, thanks for a great conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thanks for listening to the Tide Generator Podcast, produced by Avixa. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time.